August 7, 1944, Brest, France. General Hermann Ramcke has received his orders from Hitler. Hold the fortress to the last man, to the last bullet. And the American army surrounding his garrison is still assembling the force that the Brest fortifications require before the assault can begin. Both of these facts are about to become problems for everyone involved. For Ramcke, the problem is that holding to the last man means holding without relief, without resupply, without Luftwaffe air cover, and without the naval support that the port's history suggests should be forthcoming, and that the German Navy is not going to provide. For the Americans, the problem is that taking a fortress held by 38,000 paratroopers and garrison troops inside 4 years of concrete fortification is going to cost more than the fortress will be worth when it falls. The city of Brest sits at the western tip of the Breton Peninsula, where the land narrows to a rocky headland jutting into the Atlantic, and the Crozon Peninsula forms the southern arm of the Rade de Brest, a vast natural harbour covering 150 square kilometres of sheltered deep water, whose quality the French Navy recognised in the 17th century, and whose military exploitation has defined Brest's strategic significance ever since. The French Navy built its primary Atlantic base here, with the arsenal and the dry docks and the fortifications that Vauban designed in the reign of Louis XIV, and that 4 centuries of French naval investment have expanded into the most significant naval installation on France's Atlantic coast. The German Navy established its U-boat flotillas here after the fall of France in 1940, constructing the submarine pens in the harbour, whose reinforced concrete roofs, up to 8 meters thick, designed to survive the Allied bombing campaigns that would attempt to destroy them throughout the war and fail, made them effectively invulnerable to the bombardment, and whose sheltered facilities sent the submarines of the 1st, 9th, and subsequent U-boat flotillas into the Atlantic campaign that was strangling British supply lines at the height of the U-boat war in 1942 and 1943. The Americans need Brest because the Normandy Lodgement's supply system is failing in the specific and documented way of the logistics system that was designed for a slower and more contained advance than the August breakout across France has produced. The Red Ball Express and the Cherbourg port and the Mulberry Harbour are not sufficient to sustain the 40 divisions that the European campaign will eventually require, and the Brittany ports, Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, Saint-Malo, whose capture was the original justification for the Third Army's Brittany mission, are the ports whose opening the Allied supply planners have been counting on since the Overlord logistics estimates were produced in 1943. Brest alone, with its deep water facilities capable of handling the largest supply vessels, its submarine pens, its naval infrastructure, and its direct rail connections to the French interior, whose conversion from U-boat base to supply terminal the Allied planners have been projecting since the Overlord logistics estimates of 1943, is worth more to the Allied logistics system than any other French port outside of Antwerp. The Germans know this, have known it since 1940 when they invested the port's construction and the garrison's build-up with the resources that a strategically significant military installation requires. The Americans know this, have it written into the Overlord logistics plan as the supply calculation that makes the Brittany operation necessary. And General Ramcke, the German garrison commander, whose specific and documented professional character makes him the most formidable fortress commander the Americans will encounter in the entire European theater, knows it better than anyone and has organized his defense around the denial of exactly what the Americans need from Brest. General Hermann-Bernhard Ramcke is 55 years old in August 1944, a man whose biography reads as the biography of German military stubbornness across 2 world wars. Born in 1889, enlisted in the Imperial Navy in 1905, fought through the First World War in the trenches and on the sea, survived Weimar and the Reichswehr, joined the new Wehrmacht, and in the most improbable professional transformation of the interwar period, learned to jump out of aircraft at the age of 50 as one of the founding figures of the German Fallschirmjäger arm. He commanded parachute units at Crete in 1941 in the airborne assault that took the island at catastrophic cost, commanded in North Africa, and built the professional reputation of the German officer who does not stop fighting because the situation appears hopeless. He commands the 2nd Parachute Division in Brest, alongside naval garrison troops from the Kriegsmarine Shore Defense Establishment, Luftwaffe flak units, and ground personnel, Army security troops, and the mixed detachments of the Atlantic Walls garrison, whose collective composition creates a force of approximately 38,000 soldiers defending a fortified perimeter that the German military engineers have been building since 1940. 4 years of construction, concrete poured into the granite of the Breton bedrock, steel reinforcement cut and placed by French forced labor, observation bunkers and machine gun positions, and anti-tank gun emplacements, built into every ridge and headland and harbor approach. The German engineers who built the Atlantic Wall's Brittany fortifications built Brest as the fortified port complex, whose reduction they expected to cost the attacker more than the attacker was willing to pay. Ramcke believes in the fortifications. He believes in the garrison, and he believes in his orders, which tell him that Brest must be held to deny the Allies its port facilities for as long as possible. Weeks, months, whatever the garrison can sustain. What Ramcke does not have is a relief force. He does not have a German army in France capable of marching to Brest's relief because the German army in France is retreating toward the Rhine in the catastrophic aftermath of the Falaise Pockets closure on August 21 and the subsequent Seine crossings that have destroyed Army Group B's operational coherence and reduced the German forces in France to the broken formations that Model is trying to reconstitute on the Belgian border. He does not have Luftwaffe air cover because the Luftwaffe's operational capacity over France in August 1944 has been reduced to the token presence that fuel shortages and Allied air superiority have combined to produce. The Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s that appear over the battlefield intermittently and that the Allied P-47s and P-51s deal with in the brief engagements that produce no meaningful change in the siege's operational balance. He does not have the naval support that the U-boat base's history suggested the German command would provide to the port it had invested years and resources in defending. What he has is 38,000 soldiers in one of the most heavily fortified positions in occupied France, a city whose civilian population of 60,000 French men, women and children is trapped inside the perimeter between the garrison's defensive positions and the American artillery that the assault will require, and the professional conviction of the fighting general who has been ordered to hold and who intends to hold until the last bullet makes good on the order. The civilian population is the Brest siege's specific and human tragedy. The people who cannot leave because the German garrison needs the city's buildings for its defense, and who cannot be protected from the American artillery because the American artillery cannot distinguish between the building the German paratrooper is in and the building the French family is sheltering in, and who will emerge from the cellars after September 18 into a city that is 80% destroyed. The VI Corps under General Troy Middleton has been assigned to take Brest. Middleton is 55 years old, a Mississippi native and West Point graduate whose infantry career from the First World War, where he commanded a regiment at age 29, the youngest regimental commander in the American Expeditionary Force, through the interwar years as an ROTI instructor and a faculty member at Louisiana State University, whose departure from the Army to the university in the 1930s and return to service in 1941 is one of the more unusual biographical details of the senior American commanders in Europe, and into the division and corps commands of the Mediterranean and European campaigns, has produced the professional reputation of the methodical and professionally precise corps commander, who does not make impulsive decisions and does not accept preventable casualties. He commands approximately 45,000 soldiers in 3 infantry divisions: the 2nd Infantry Division under General Walter Robertson, the 8th Infantry Division under General Donald Stroh, and the 29th Infantry Division under General Charles Gerhardt, whose attachment from the 1st Army to the Vouet Corps for the Brest operation brings the assault force to 3 experienced divisions with tank and artillery support. He has the force. He has the mission. What he does not have is the time. The supply situation's urgency means the Brest operation cannot consume unlimited weeks. And every day the port is not open is a day the Allied advance toward Germany is operating on increasingly strained logistics, whose specific and documented strain the Red Ball Express's fuel shortages and the Cherbourg port's limited capacity are producing in the forward units that are running low on fuel and ammunition at the exact moment when the advance's momentum is the most operationally valuable asset the Allied command possesses. The question, in the first week of August 1944, as the American forces are completing their encirclement of the Brittany Peninsula, and as Ramcke is moving his garrison into the final defensive positions that the siege will be fought from, is whether 38,000 German paratroopers and garrison troops in 4 years of concrete fortifications can hold Brest long enough to matter to the strategic equation whose terms are already shifting under the pressure of the August advance's pace. Whether a port denied to the Allies for weeks or months is worth the cost in American lives and material that its reduction will require, and what happens to the 60,000 French civilians trapped inside the Brest perimeter between the garrison that cannot let them leave and the American artillery that cannot stop for the civilians when the assault on the fortified positions begins. August 7 through 25, 1944. The Vauban Corps begins its investment of Brest in the first week of August, with the 8th Infantry Division, under General Stroh, pushing from the east toward the outer defensive ring, and the 2nd Infantry Division, under General Robertson, approaching from the northeast, while the 29th Infantry Division covers the southern approaches across the Landerneau Plain, whose open terrain gives the defenders the fields of fire that the defensive plan assumes will slow the American advance. The outer German defensive ring, the arc of fortified positions, pillboxes, anti-tank gun emplacements, and barbed wire obstacles that the German military engineers have constructed from the granite of the Breton countryside over 4 years of occupation, is not a continuous line, but a series of mutually supporting strongpoints, whose combined fields of fire cover every approach to the city, and whose individual reduction requires the specific and costly technique of the infantry assault against prepared positions. The advance under artillery and mortar fire across the open ground between the American positions and the German bunkers. The flanking movement to find the dead ground where the bunker's field of fire cannot reach. The close assault with the Bangalore torpedo and the satchel charge and the flamethrower against the concrete bunker whose walls the 155mm artillery has already struck without destroying. These are the techniques of the siege, and they are expensive in the human currency that they require. The 8th Infantry Division's 28th Infantry Regiment attacks the eastern outer ring positions on August 8th and finds the German parachute troops of the 2nd Parachute Division conducting the specific and professional defense of the prepared position. The defense that has been trained and rehearsed for the specific terrain and the specific American assault tactics that the German intelligence assessments have been projecting since 1943. The defense that makes the attacker pay for every meter by using the concrete walls and the granite outcroppings and the wire obstacles and the carefully laid minefields to channel the American infantry into the kill zones that the German machine guns and the anti-tank guns and the mortars have been registered on for months. The casualties in the first week of the outer ring fighting are the casualties of the attritional siege, whose character the fortification quality and the garrison's professional quality combine to produce. The 8th Infantry Division loses 40 killed and 185 wounded in the first week of operations before the outer ring's easternmost positions have been cleared and the forward artillery observation posts established on the high ground that overlooks the city. The 29th Infantry Division's 175th Infantry Regiment loses 28 killed in a single day's fighting on August 12 against the outer ring positions on the Plougastel Peninsula, whose defenders hold the heights above the Alorne River estuary with the professional conviction of the parachute soldiers who have been told to hold and who are holding. August 25, 1944. The formal siege begins. Middleton has assembled his corps' full strength, and his artillery has been brought forward to the positions whose registration on the German defensive network the past 3 weeks of outer ring fighting have permitted. The 2nd Infantry Division, which has been brought forward on Middleton's order on August 25, takes the anchor role in the northern sector of the siege line, whose establishment around the entire Brest perimeter is the precondition for the systematic reduction of Brest's inner defenses. General Robertson's 2nd Infantry Division soldiers, the Indian Head Division, veterans of the Normandy campaign's bitter fighting at Cerisy-la-Forêt and Saint-Lô, and the hedgerow country, whose specific and attritional character has prepared them for exactly this kind of siege fighting, establish their siege positions on the high ground north of Brest that overlooks the harbour and the city and provides the observation that the artillery's systematic registration of the German defensive positions requires. The observation posts on the northern heights can see into the city, can see the German positions in the harbour district and the naval arsenal and the streets of the old town, with the specific and operational clarity of the high ground that makes the artillery's precise fire possible. The Vauban Corps artillery begins the systematic registration of the German positions on August 25 and does not stop until September 18. The 29th Infantry Division's 116th Infantry Regiment, the regiment that fought through Omaha Beach on D-Day, and whose combat record since June 6 has produced the specific and hard-won infantry experience that the Brest siege's character requires, attacks the outer ring positions on the Crozon Peninsula's neck to isolate the southern harbour approaches and begin the reduction of the peninsula's defensive positions, whose heavy coastal guns cover the harbour mouth. Middleton's artillery, 12 battalions of 155mm howitzers, supported by 8-inch howitzers and 240mm guns, brought forward for the siege. The VI Corps artillery, under Brigadier General Charles Hart, whose preparation of the fire plan has been the operational planning effort since the investment began, starts the systematic bombardment whose purpose is the suppression of the German coastal guns that would otherwise make the eventual naval approach to the harbour impossible, and whose secondary effect is the progressive destruction of the city's buildings that Ramcke's defenders are using as fortified positions. The artillery fires 20,000 rounds in the first week of the formal siege. The city begins to burn in the specific and visible way of the stone city, whose buildings burn from their timber interiors when the artillery's fire ignites them. The fires in the harbour district visible from the siege lines on the northern heights, the smoke rising from the naval arsenal and the commercial district, and the old town, whose buildings the German garrison has been defending from, and the American artillery has been targeting since the siege began. September 1 through 12, 1944. The inner defensive ring, the near failure of the V Corps' assault operation, arrives in the specific and operationally significant form of the German counterattack against the 2nd Infantry Division's positions in the first week of September. The counterattack that Ramcke orders on September 3 against the 2nd Division's 9th Infantry Regiment sector on the northern outskirts of Brest, where the 9th Infantry's forward companies have pushed into the city's northern suburbs and established the observation posts that the artillery plan requires. Ramcke commits 2 battalions of the 7th Parachute Regiment under Colonel Friedrich August von der Heydte, a decorated veteran of Crete and North Africa, whose professional reputation in the German parachute arm is the reputation of the aggressive and capable battalion and regimental commander. In the counterattack that drives the 9th Infantry's forward, companies back 300 meters before the 9th Infantry's reserve companies and the VI Corps artillery stop it in the specific and visceral way of the defensive counterattack. The German paratroopers, advancing through the streets of burning Brest in the morning darkness, their assault rifles and their machine pistols firing at the American positions in the rubble, the American artillery dropping the pre-planned concentration on the avenue of advance, the buildings on either side of the street collapsing into the rubble that stops the attack's momentum as completely as the rifle fire and the anti-tank gunfire, whose combined effect the building's rubble channels into the killing zone where von der Heydte's soldiers are dying. The counterattack fails. Von der Heydte's battalions lose 200 killed and wounded in the September 3 action, losses that Ramcke's garrison cannot replace. whose replenishment would require the supply line from Germany, that the American encirclement of the Brittany Peninsula has eliminated. Ramcke knows the counterattack has failed. He does not order another one. He returns to the fortress defense, whose specific professional objective, delay, denial, attrition, does not require success, only persistence. He has approximately 35,000 soldiers remaining after the outer ring fighting's casualties. He has the fortifications of the inner defensive ring, whose concrete and granite quality the outer ring fighting has demonstrated. He has the orders whose authority derives from Hitler and whose content has not changed since August 7. He will use all three for as long as the remaining two allow, for as long as the soldiers and the fortifications can sustain the defense that the orders require. September 8, 1944. The VE Corps launches the main assault on Brest's inner defensive ring, with all three divisions attacking simultaneously across a perimeter whose length and whose fortification quality make the simultaneous assault the only option that prevents Ramcke from concentrating his reserve against the single point of effort. The 2nd Infantry Division attacks south from the high ground into the city's northern districts, while the 8th Infantry Division attacks west through the eastern suburbs, whose rubble the weeks of artillery fire have been steadily expanding into the obstacle course that the urban assault's infantry must navigate. The 29th Infantry Division crosses the harbor's southern arm to attack Fort Montbarret on the western side of the Brest perimeter, the 18th century Vauban fortress that Ramcke has converted into the strongest single defensive position in the Brest perimeter. Its stone walls and its dry moat and its underground casements, whose 17th century construction has been reinforced by the German engineers' 4 years of improvement work into the specific and visceral obstacle of the historical fortress, adapted for modern defensive use. Fort Montbarret falls on September 14th, after 6 days of assault by the 2nd Infantry Division's 38th Infantry Regiment, in cooperation with British Crocodile flame tanks of the 141st Royal Armoured Corps, whose streams of burning fuel projected against the fort's 18th century stone walls produced the specific and terrible visual of the fortress under flame assault. The burning jellied fuel flowing into the embrasures and the gun ports, the defenders in the underground casements choosing between the flame that is entering from above and the surrender that the American infantry is offering from the breached gate, the heat and the smoke, and the specific psychological effect of the flame weapon that makes the conventional defense's resistance impossible to sustain. The American infantry of the 38th Regiment follows the Crocodiles through the fort's breached gate in the assault that takes the position at a cost of 80 American killed and wounded and 800 German killed, wounded or captured. The largest single action of the Brest siege's final phase, September 12 through 18, 1944. The final collapse. By September 12, the 3 American divisions have compressed Ramcke's garrison into the inner city and the harbor district, a perimeter that covers perhaps 1/4 of the original Brest defensive ring's area, but whose fortification density and whose parachute infantry quality make it proportionally as difficult to reduce. The reduction requires the street-by-street, building-by-building fighting of the urban assault, in which the defenders' use of the city's stone buildings as fortified positions makes every block an independent tactical problem. The 29th Infantry Division's 175th Infantry Regiment fights through the Recurvance district, the old quarter on the western side of the Penfeld River that divides Brest, in the specific and costly way of the urban assault that reduces the fighting to the squad level. The smoke grenade to cover the crossing of the open street, the rifle grenade through the ground floor window, the engineer with the satchel charge at the building's corner, the German paratrooper in the cellar, whose position cannot be taken without the specific and human cost of the man who goes in first. The 2nd Infantry Division fights through the naval arsenal, the fortified complex of workshops and dry docks and warehouses and administrative buildings on the harbor's northern shore, that Ramcke's Kriegsmarine sailors and naval engineers defend with the professional conviction of sailors fighting for their own base, in the last days available for that conviction's expression. The arsenal's stone buildings and heavy machinery provide the same defensive advantage the city's construction has provided throughout the siege. The 2nd Infantry Division's 38th Infantry Regiment loses 45 killed in the arsenal fighting of September 13 through 15. By September 15th, the Vauban Corps has taken 95% of Brest. Ramcke is in the remaining 5% with approximately 3,000 soldiers, and he is still fighting in the harbour district's final defensive positions, fighting with the ammunition that remains after 43 days of siege consumption, fighting because his orders have not changed. September 18, 1944. General Ramcke surrenders. He surrenders personally, emerging from the final command post in the harbour district in the specific and documented scene of the German general, who has taken his orders to their logical conclusion. He has held Brest for 43 days after the American investment began. 43 days of defending every sector of the perimeter against an assault force of 3 experienced American infantry divisions, with 12 battalions of artillery and attached armor and engineer support. 43 days of managing the 60,000 civilian population trapped inside the perimeter, whose food supply the garrison's consumption is competing with. 43 days of declining ammunition, whose replenishment is impossible, and declining rations, whose reduction below the minimum has been authorized by Army Group Command, and 43 days of waiting for the relief force that Berlin has not sent, because Berlin has already decided that Brest's value is in the denial, and the denial is being accomplished. He has denied the port to the Allied logistics system for 43 days during the Allied advance toward Germany, whose logistics system the port was supposed to be sustaining. He has inflicted 9,831 American casualties, approximately 1,000 killed, 7,500 wounded, 1,300 missing, on the 3 divisions of the Vauban Corps in the specific and costly siege that the fortress's strength and the garrison's professional quality required. He surrenders to General Middleton on September 18, 1944, in the specific and documented scene of the formal military surrender. He is reported in the accounts of the officers present at the surrender ceremony to have asked to see Middleton's credentials, to have demanded that the American Corps commander prove his professional standing before Ramcke would acknowledge the surrender's legitimacy, because Ramcke's specific and professional character includes the insistence on the correct forms even in capitulation, and because the German officer's relationship to the military convention does not relax simply because the convention is being invoked against him. Middleton produces his identification with the patient professionalism of the Corps commander who has just spent 43 days reducing a fortress, and who is not going to be annoyed by the formalities of the surrender's execution. Ramcke acknowledges the surrender. Brest falls. In the rubble of 43 days of siege, its port demolished, its city largely destroyed, its 60,000 French civilians emerging from the basements and the shelters where they have been living for 6 weeks. The legacy of the 43-day siege of Brest is the legacy of the Allied campaign's most expensive and most strategically ambiguous battle of the French campaign. Expensive in the American casualties, whose count of 9,831, killed, wounded, and missing, exceeded the casualties of many Normandy battles. And strategically ambiguous, because the port that the Vichy Corps took on September 18, 1944, was not the port that the overlord logistics planners had projected as the supply system's salvation in the 1943 planning sessions, whose assumption was that the Brittany ports would be available and functional by summer 1944. Ramcke's garrison, following its orders and the Wehrmacht's standard practice for the fortress defense, whose final act is always the denial of what the attacker came for, had destroyed the port facilities in the days before surrendering, had demolished the cranes, the quays, the warehouses, the deep water approaches, the lock mechanisms, and the infrastructure that made Brest valuable as a supply port rather than merely as a deep harbor. The American engineers who entered Brest on September 19 and began the port survey reported that the port's infrastructure had been demolished with the specific and professional thoroughness of the German military engineer, who has been preparing the demolition plan for exactly this contingency since the Allied landings in Normandy in June 1944. every harbor crane toppled, every quay wall blown, the submarine pen access channels choked, the dry dock gates destroyed, the harbor railway terminal wrecked, the deep water berths blocked with scuttled vessels, the warehouse infrastructure collapsed. Brest would not be operational as a supply port until April 1945, 7 months after its capture. 7 months of American engineering effort, whose cost in time and labor and material must be added to the siege's 9,831 casualties. That is the operational judgment in a single sentence. The port opened in April 1945, and the war ended in May 1945, which means the port that 9,831 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing to capture was operational for approximately 3 weeks before the war ended, and contributed essentially nothing to the Allied supply effort that the siege's strategic justification was built on. It never contributed meaningfully to the Allied supply effort, which is the number that the siege's strategic ledger must always carry, and the calculation that the planners who committed the VI Corps to Brest in August 1944 owe to the record. The strategic reckoning of the Brest siege is a reckoning that the post-war analysis has conducted with the honest professional assessment of the Allied planning's misjudgment. A misjudgment that the operational situation's evolution made clear by September 1944, but that the institutional commitment to the Overlord logistics plan prevented from being recognized early enough to redirect the VI Corps' effort. The Corps was committed to a 43-day, 9,831 casualty siege of a port that would be operationally useless by the time it was taken, when those same forces and those same 43 days might have been employed on the main advance toward Germany. Patton's Third Army was running out of fuel at the Moselle in September 1944, and 3 additional infantry divisions on the main effort axis might have made the difference between stopping at the Moselle and crossing it before the German defensive system reconstituted. The VI Corps was fighting for Brest, while the strategic situation was rendering Brest irrelevant, fighting with 45,000 soldiers and 12 artillery battalions and 43 days of siege operations for a port that the German garrison was simultaneously preparing to demolish. It is the specific and documented operational irony of the Brest siege that the Americans and the Germans were both working toward the same endpoint from different directions. The Americans were trying to take the port intact and open it to supply shipping, and the Germans were trying to deny it by holding it long enough to prepare and execute the demolition plan, and the denial succeeded because the demolition plan was more achievable than the defense, and because the defense lasted exactly long enough for the demolition plan to be fully executed before the surrender. The garrison held for 43 days. The port was destroyed before it could be surrendered. The siege was a German strategic success, embedded inside a German tactical defeat. The rarest kind of military outcome, the one where the losing side achieves its actual objective through the act of losing. The V Corps was fighting for Brest while the strategic situation was rendering Brest irrelevant, and the institutional commitment to the Overlord logistics plan prevented the operational adjustment that the September situation's character required. Ramcke held Brest for 43 days after Berlin had effectively stopped answering, had written off the Brittany garrison as the strategic sacrifice whose denial of the port was the garrison's final operational purpose. He held it not because he expected relief, not because he believed the war was still winnable from inside the Brest perimeter, but because the professional soldier's specific and particular relationship to his orders does not include the option of stopping when the strategic situation makes the order's execution pointless. He had orders to hold. He held for 43 days. The port was useless when he surrendered it because the Wehrmacht's demolition teams had made it so. The Americans who died taking Brest deserved better planning than the plan that sent them there. The operational judgment that the strategic situation had changed enough by August 1944 to make the Brest commitment a strategic error whose execution was technically proficient and operationally costly and strategically pointless. And Ramcke, in his specific and professional way, fought the Americans to exactly the conclusion that his orders required, which is what the professional soldier does when he is ordered to hold a fortress that the strategic situation has already decided will not matter to the war's outcome. because the professional soldier's relationship to his orders does not include the clause that says, stop when the purpose has been overtaken by events.